The cold hit me first, not the gentle chill of air conditioning, but the bone-deep cold that seeps through skin and settles in your marrow like ice crystals forming in winter fog. My eyelids felt heavy, weighted down by something I couldn't name. When I finally forced them open, fluorescent lights blazed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, turning the world into sharp edges and bleached shadows. I'm Elena. I'm 29, and I shouldn't be alive. The thought came unbidden, floating through my consciousness like debris after a shipwreck. I tried to move, tried to sit up, but my body felt foreign, disconnected, like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. My fingers were blue-tinged, my breath coming in shallow puffs of vapor that shouldn't exist in any normal room. The smell hit me next. Antiseptic, formaldehyde, and underneath it all, something metallic and final that made my stomach clench with recognition. I'd spent enough time in hospitals to know that smell. Death had a signature, and I was drowning in it. The ceiling above me wasn't the familiar drop tiles of the ICU where I'd spent my last conscious moments. These were concrete, painted institutional white, with exposed pipes snaking between support beams. Basement. I was in the basement. My medical training kicked in before panic could take hold, cataloging details with clinical precision even as my world tilted sideways. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under harsh lighting, scales, examination tables, refrigeration units humming their mechanical lullabies. The morgue. I was in the fucking morgue. I sat up slowly, fighting waves of dizziness that threatened to pull me back under. My hospital gown had been replaced by something else, something that tied in the back and fell open at the sides, the kind of gown they put on people who would never complain about modesty again. My wrist felt naked. I looked down and realized why. My medical bracelet was gone. The one that identified me as Dr. Elena Vasquez, trauma surgeon, blood type AB negative, emergency contact, Dr. Marcus Chen. In its place was a thin band of plastic with a number, not my name. Just a number, like I was inventory waiting to be processed. The metal gurney beneath me was cold against my skin, and when my palm touched the side rail, the world exploded. Flashes, voices, images crashing through my mind like a broken film reel. "She's been declared brain dead," my mother's voice, crisp and matter of fact. "The doctors confirmed it this morning. There's no brain activity." "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Bobby's voice, uncertain but tinged with something that sounded like greed. What if she what? Wakes up? Look at her, Roberto. She's gone. Has been for days. We're just prolonging the inevitable. Isabella's perfectly manicured hand gesturing toward the hospital bed where my body lay motionless. The lawyer says we can proceed with the estate planning immediately once we sign the papers. But Elena's practice, her investments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We'll solve all our problems. Your gambling debts, my situation with the creditors, everything. She would have wanted to help family. This is what she would have wanted. I jerked my hand back from the metal rail, gasping as the visions faded. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat echoing in the sterile silence. The cold wasn't just from the morgue anymore. It was seeping in from somewhere deeper, somewhere that recognized betrayal in its purest form. Brain dead. They'd declared me brain dead. I pressed my fingers to my pulse point, feeling the steady rhythm that proved them wrong. My pupils responded to light when I held my hand up to block the fluorescence. I could move, think, remember. Whatever had happened to me in that car accident, whatever damage they thought they had seen on the scans, I was very much alive. And they'd given up on me, signed papers, declared me dead. For money. The realization settled over me like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. Years of sending checks home, thousands every month to keep them comfortable. Mortgage payments, car loans, credit card bills, even Bobby's gambling debts that kept mysteriously reappearing no matter how many times I'd billed him out. I'd worked 80-hour weeks, skipped vacations, postponed my own life because family came first, because love meant sacrifice. But I was never family to them. I was a resource, a revenue stream, and now that the stream was supposed to have run dry, they were cashing in. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, rubber soles squeaking against polished linoleum. I slid off the gurney, my legs shaky but functional, and pressed myself against the wall beside the door. The footsteps passed without slowing, but the sound sent adrenaline coursing through my system. If someone found me here, if they realized I was alive, what would they do? Call my family? Tell them their cash cow had survived after all? Or would they finish what the car accident had started? I needed to get out of here, needed to understand what had happened, how long I'd been unconscious, what legal machinations my family had already set in motion. But first, I needed clothes. I couldn't investigate anything wearing a morgue gown that left my ass hanging out in the Chicago winter. The morgue had lockers along one wall, and I found scrubs in my size in the second one I opened. They smelled like industrial detergent and starch, but they were warm and covered everything that needed covering. As I pulled the shirt over my head, my fingers brushed against my collarbone, and another flash hit me. The car accident. Rain on the windshield. Headlights in my rearview mirror, growing larger, too fast, too close. The impact that sent my BMW spinning across 3 lanes of the Eisenhower Expressway. Glass and metal, and the taste of blood. But that wasn't what killed me. The accident was bad, yes, but not fatal. Traumatic brain injury, they'd said. Swelling. Induced coma to let the brain heal. I should have healed. I should have woken up. But they'd made sure I didn't. The vision faded, leaving me breathless and furious. Somehow, touching objects was triggering these flashes, these glimpses of recent events connected to whatever I touched. The medical equipment, the gurney, even my own skin. They all held memories, emotions, imprints of what had happened. It should have been impossible. There was no scientific explanation for what I was experiencing. But after 3 days of being technically dead, impossible had become relative. I found an employee exit that led to a stairwell, the kind of maintenance access that hospital staff use to move between floors without disturbing patients and families in the main corridors. The concrete steps felt solid under my feet, each one taking me further from the basement morgue and closer to answers. But as I climbed, one thought echoed in my mind like a funeral bell. They thought I was dead. They'd made sure I stayed dead. And now I was going to find out exactly how far they were willing to go to keep their inheritance intact. The stairwell door on the main floor opened into a service corridor that ran parallel to the main hospital hallways. Through small windows in the connecting doors, I could see the familiar chaos of a major medical center. Nurses rushing between rooms, families clustered in waiting areas, the controlled urgency that defined life and death decisions. I had been part of this world for 7 years. Chicago Metropolitan Hospital had been my second home, the place where I'd built my reputation as one of the youngest trauma surgeons in the state. These hallways should have felt safe, familiar. Instead, they felt like enemy territory. The service corridors were a maze I'd never bothered to learn during my residency and fellowship. Back then, I'd walk the main halls with confidence. White coat pristine, stethoscope around my neck like a badge of honor. Now I skulked through maintenance passages like a ghost, avoiding security cameras and the questioning looks of cleaning staff who work the night shift. My destination was ICU 3, the neurological intensive care unit where I'd spent my last conscious days. If I was going to understand what had happened, I needed to see my medical records, needed to understand how a woman with a traumatic brain injury had ended up declared brain dead and shipped to the morgue while very much alive. The ICU felt different at night, quieter but more intense somehow. The electronic symphony of ventilators and monitors created a rhythm that spoke of lives hanging in balance, of families praying for miracles, while doctors fought against time and biology. I'd always found comfort in that sound. Tonight it felt ominous. Room 314 had been mine. Through the small window in the door, I could see it was occupied again, an elderly man surrounded by the same machines that had kept me breathing. The sight twisted something in my chest. Life moves on quickly in the ICU. There was always another crisis, another family to comfort, another impossible choice to make. But that wasn't what killed me. I needed to get to the nurse's station, to the computer terminals where my records would be stored. The problem was visibility. Even at night, the ICU was staffed, and someone would notice a woman in scrubs who shouldn't be there. That's when I saw her. Nurse Patricia Williams, according to her badge, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She was reviewing charts at the central station, her movements efficient and economical. 30 years of night shifts had made her movements almost automatic, but there was something in her posture that suggested alertness, like a sentry on watch. I waited in the service corridor until she left the station to check on a patient, then slipped through the connecting door and approached the nearest computer terminal. The screen was still logged in, Patricia's credentials giving me access to the hospital's electronic medical record system. Finding my file took seconds. Reading it took longer, and with each line, my fury grew colder and more focused. Patient presented with severe traumatic brain injury following motor vehicle accident. Initial CT scan showed cerebral edema, but no indication of irreversible damage. Induced coma initiated to reduce intracranial pressure. Patient responding well to treatment, swelling decreasing as of day 3. Day 4. Family requested conference regarding prognosis. Dr. Sarah Kim, attending neurologist, indicated cautious optimism for recovery. Day 5. Family met with hospital administration and legal team. Power of attorney documentation presented by Vincenzo Moretti, SQ, on behalf of Isabella Vasquez, patient's mother. Day 6. Per family directive and legal consultation, life support measures to be discontinued. Patient transferred to comfort care protocols. Day 7. Patient expired at 11:47 p.m. Death certificate signed by attending physician, body released to morgue for preparation.
But I hadn't expired. I'd been transferred, yes, but not to comfort care, to the morgue, while still alive. Someone had falsified my death certificate, had erased the record of my actual survival. My hands shook as I scrolled through the documentation, looking for any mention of the miracle they should have recorded when I didn't actually die. There was nothing. According to the hospital's records, Elena Vasquez had flatlined and been pronounced dead by Dr. Matthews, the night attending. I'd never heard of Dr. Matthews. "Can I help you?" The voice behind me was quiet, but firm. I spun around to find Patricia Williams standing 3 feet away, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She'd moved with the silent efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate crisis situations without adding to the chaos. My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I was just checking on a patient who died 3 days ago." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Funny thing about that patient. Elena Vasquez, brilliant surgeon, worked herself half to death taking care of everyone else, had a family that talked a good game about loving her, but only seemed to show up when the lawyers were involved." My heart stopped. "You knew?" I knew something was wrong. 30 years of watching families make impossible decisions, and you learn to read people. That woman's mother, Isabella, she wasn't grieving, she was calculating. And her son, Bobby, guilty as sin about something, kept checking his phone like he was waiting for news that hadn't come yet. Patricia moved closer, studying my face with the intensity of someone trained to notice subtle changes in patient condition. "You look remarkably like Dr. Vasquez. Same bone structure, same eyes. Of course, that would be impossible since she's supposed to be dead." "I'm not dead." The voice came out stronger than I felt. "They said I was, but I'm not." "No," Patricia agreed quietly. "You're not. Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" Before I could answer, the sound of voices in the main corridor made us both freeze. Patricia grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a supply closet, her grip firm but not painful. "Family meeting in conference room B," she whispered as we pressed ourselves against shelves of medical supplies. "They've been coming every night since you supposedly died, always after visiting hours, always with that lawyer. Through the crack in the door, I could see them. Isabella, perfectly dressed even at midnight, her black hair swept back in a style that probably cost more than most people made in a week. Bobby, fidgeting with his phone, his usually charming smile replaced by nervous tension. And between them, a man in an expensive suit who could only be Vincent Moretti. The accounts have been frozen pending probate, but I've expedited the process. We should have access within 48 hours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And the medical practice. Isabella's voice carried the tone of someone discussing a business transaction, not her daughter's death. Already in motion. The partnership agreements Elena signed give the surviving partners right of first refusal, but since she never married and has no children, her shares revert to next of kin. That's you, as her mother. What about Sophia? Bobby asked, his voice tight with something that might have been conscience trying to surface. What about Sophia? She signed the family agreement Elena drafted last year. She gets a small settlement, but the bulk of the estate goes to you and your mother. She understands the family situation. They disappeared into the conference room, but their voices carried through the thin walls. Patricia and I remained hidden, listening to my family divide up my life like vultures, picking apart a carcass. The gambling debts are more serious than we discussed, Bobby. Your creditors aren't the patient type. They're expecting payment now that your sister's insurance has paid out. How much? Isabella's voice was sharp. $800,000. And that's just what Bobby owes to people who report to the IRS. There are other debts, to people who collect with interest that compounds in broken bones. My breath caught. $800,000. I'd known Bobby had gambling problems, had bailed him out more times than I could count. But I'd never imagined the scope of his addiction. No wonder they'd been so eager to see me declared dead. The life insurance alone covers that, Isabella replied, and once we liquidate her investment portfolio and sell the practice, we'll be looking at roughly $4 million total, enough to pay off Bobby's situation and leave you both comfortable for life. What about the investigation? Bobby's voice was barely audible. What investigation? Moretti's tone was sharp. There was a detective asking questions at the funeral home. Something about irregularities in the death certificate. Silence stretched in the conference room. Finally, Moretti spoke again, his voice carefully controlled. Detective Kowalski. Yes, I'm aware of his inquiries. It's routine when there's a significant insurance payout involved. Nothing to worry about as long as everyone sticks to the story. What story? That Elena never regained consciousness after the accident, that her brain injuries were too severe for recovery, that as her loving family, you made the difficult decision to let her go with dignity. More silence. Then Isabella's voice, cold and decisive. It's not a story if it's true. Elena was brain dead. We did what we had to do. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound. The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she'd convinced herself that her lies were justified, made my stomach turn. This was my mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd been the first person I'd called when I'd matched into my surgical residency, the woman who just admitted to having me killed. Patricia's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing gently. When our skin touched, I felt a flash of her memories. Her own daughter, lost to a drunk driver 5 years ago. The helpless rage of watching someone you love become a statistic. The profound loneliness of losing the one person who mattered most. And underneath it all, a fierce protective instinct that had transferred itself to me, the daughter figure she'd never been able to save. "We need to go," she whispered as the voices in the conference room began to move toward the door, before they finish up and see us. We slipped out of the supply closet and through the service corridor as my family concluded their business meeting disguised as grief counseling. But as we walked, one thought kept circling through my mind like a shark. They'd killed me for money, and if they discovered I was still alive, they'd find a way to finish the job.
Patricia led me through a maze of service corridors to an empty break room on the 5th floor, far from the ICU and any late-night family meetings. The room smelled like reheated coffee and disinfectant, with mismatched furniture that had seen too many exhausted medical professionals collapse into its embrace. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I could see myself clearly for the first time since waking up in the morgue. I looked like hell. My skin was pale with an undertone that suggested recent proximity to death. My hair hung limp and unwashed, and there were shadows under my eyes that spoke of trauma the human body wasn't designed to survive. But I was alive. Undeniably, impossibly alive. "You need medical attention," Patricia said, settling into a chair across from me with the weary grace of someone who'd perfected the art of stolen moments between crises. "Whatever they did to you, whatever happened in that morgue, your body's been through something it wasn't meant to experience." "I'm fine." "No, that's not true. I'm not fine. I don't understand what's happening to me." "The visions?" I stared at her. "How did you know?" 30 years of nursing teaches you to notice things. The way you reacted when you touched the computer, the way you pulled back from contact like it burned, and just now when you touched my hand. She studied my face carefully. "What did you see?" There was no point in lying. Patricia had already seen too much, known too much for me to pretend this was normal. "Your daughter, the accident. How much you miss her." Patricia's composure cracked just slightly, a tremor around her eyes that spoke of old pain never fully healed. Sarah was 19, nursing student, just like her mother. Drunk driver ran a red light and hit her on her way home from her clinical rotation. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Use it." Patricia leaned forward, her voice intense. "You've been given something impossible, Elena. The ability to see truth, to understand what people hide. In the right hands, that's not a curse. It's justice." "I don't know if I can control it." "Then you need to learn, and you need help from someone who understands both the medical side and the other side of what's happening to you." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts. "Dr. Marcus Chen, you know him?" My heart lurched. Marcus, my closest colleague, the one person in the hospital I trusted with my doubts and fears and the occasional laugh during the darkest moments of emergency surgery. The one person whose opinion mattered more than I'd ever admitted to myself. "I know him." "Good, because he's been asking questions about your case since the day you supposedly died. Questions that made the administration nervous enough to suggest you take some time off to grieve." 20 minutes later, I stood outside Marcus's office on the surgical floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. Patricia had called ahead, used some combination of medical necessity and personal favor to get him to come in at nearly 2 in the morning. But what would I say? How do you explain to someone who lives by scientific principles that you've come back from the dead with supernatural abilities? The office door was slightly ajar, and I could see him inside, pacing behind his desk with the restless energy that had always marked him during difficult cases. Dr. Marcus Chen, surgical resident turned attending physician, the son of immigrants who'd built their American dream one careful decision at a time. He'd learned early that precision and dedication were the only currencies that mattered in medicine. He was also the man who'd stayed late with me during my worst cases, who'd brought me coffee during 36-hour shifts, and been the first person to celebrate when I'd made attending physician. The man whose smile could make even the worst day bearable, and whose absence from my life had been one of the prices I'd paid for my dedication to family. I knocked softly on the doorframe. "Marcus?" He turned, and the expression that crossed his face was everything I'd hoped for and feared. Relief, joy, disbelief, and underneath it all, the careful wariness of someone trained to trust evidence over miracles. "Elena." My name came out as barely a whisper. "Jesus Christ, Elena!" I stepped into the office and closed the door behind me. "I know this is impossible. I know what the records say, what everyone believes, but I'm here, and I'm alive, and I need your help." He moved toward me slowly, like I might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped, his hands hovering just inches from my face. "May I?" I nodded, and his fingers touched my cheek with the gentle precision he brought to surgery. His skin was warm against mine, and for a moment I was afraid of what visions might come, what private moments I might accidentally witness. Instead, I saw his memories of me. Late nights in the surgical suite, working together with the seamless coordination of two people who trusted each other completely. Conversations in the break room about cases, about life, about the future we both wanted in medicine. And underneath it all, feelings he'd never expressed, emotions he'd kept professional and hidden out of respect for my boundaries and his own career. He'd loved me, quietly, carefully, without expectation or demand. And he'd grieved me with the depth of someone who'd lost not just a colleague, but a possibility. "Your pulse is strong," he said, his medical training asserting itself even as his personal world tilted sideways. "Pupils reactive, skin temp normal. You're alive, Elena. You're actually alive. According to the hospital records, I died 3 days ago. According to the hospital records, you were declared brain dead after your family made the decision to withdraw life support. But Elena," he moved to his desk and pulled out a tablet, scrolling through medical files with the quick efficiency of someone who'd memorized every detail. "Your last brain scan showed improvement. The swelling was decreasing, your responses were getting stronger. There was no medical justification for declaring you brain dead." "Then why did they?" "Money." The word came out flat and bitter. "Your mother met with hospital administration the day before they made the declaration. She brought a lawyer, threatened a malpractice suit if the hospital didn't agree that continued treatment was futile, said she had medical power of attorney and wanted to spare you further suffering." Vincent Moretti. Marcus looked up sharply. "You know him?" "I know more than I should." I moved to the chair across from his desk, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything I'd learned. "Marcus, something happened to me when they turned off my life support. Something that shouldn't be possible." I told him everything. The morgue, the visions, the way touching objects seemed to unlock memories and emotions connected to them. I told him about my family's late-night meetings, about Bobby's gambling debts and Isabella's financial desperation. I told him about the $800,000 and the $4 million they expected to gain from my death. He listened without interruption, his expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and finally, acceptance. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Show me," he said finally. "What?" "Show me these visions. Touch something of mine and tell me what you see." I hesitated. The visions were unpredictable, sometimes intimate, sometimes painful. But if Marcus was going to help me, he needed to understand what we were dealing with. I reached across the desk and touched his stethoscope, the one he had carried since residency. The metal was warm from recent use, and the memories came in a rush. A car accident victim, barely alive, Marcus working frantically to stop internal bleeding. The moment when he realized the patient was Elena Vasquez, his colleague, his friend. The way his hands had shaken as he'd tried to stabilize her for transport to the ICU. Days later, visiting her room when he thought no one was watching, talking to her unconscious form about cases they had worked together, about how the hospital felt empty without her presence, and the meeting with administration where they'd suggested he take time off to grieve, the barely concealed threat that his questions about her treatment were unwelcome. And through it all, the growing certainty that something was wrong with her case, that the family's urgency to withdraw care didn't match the medical reality of her condition. I pulled my hand back, breathing hard. "You never believed I was brain dead." "No." His voice was rough with emotion. "The scans didn't support it. The timeline didn't make sense. And your family?" He shook his head. "I've seen grief, Elena. I've seen families make impossible decisions out of love. What I saw from your mother and brother wasn't grief. It was something else. Greed. Yes. But proving that is another matter entirely." He leaned forward, his expression becoming clinical, focused. "Elena, you're describing these visions, this psychometric ability. It's not scientifically possible. But neither is surviving what you survived. Something fundamental changed in your brain during those moments when you were technically dead. Can you help me understand it?" "I can try, but first we need to make sure you're medically stable, and we need to figure out what we're going to do about your family's conspiracy. They think I'm dead. That gives us an advantage. It also puts you in danger. If they discover you're alive,
He didn't finish the thought, but we both understood the implications.
I know. I met his eyes, seeing the fear and determination there, the same combination I felt in my own chest. But I can't let them get away with this. They murdered me, Marcus. The fact that I survived doesn't change what they intended. He nodded slowly. Then we need allies, people who understand both the medical side and the legal implications. Do you know anyone? Actually, yes. Dr. Sarah Kim, the neurologist who treated you. She's been asking the same questions I have, and she has some theories about consciousness and near-death experiences that the medical establishment considers controversial. Controversial how? Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office. She believes that extreme trauma can sometimes unlock latent psychic abilities, that the boundary between life and death is more permeable than we understand. You think she'll believe what's happening to me? I think she'll be fascinated by it. And Elena, he reached across the desk and took my hand, his touch warm and steady and free of visions. I believe you. Whatever we're dealing with, whatever this means for your future, you're not facing it alone. For the first time since waking up in the morgue, I felt something that might have been hope. Marcus had always been my anchor in the chaos of medicine, the person who could make me believe that healing was possible even in the darkest circumstances. Now, as we sat in his office planning our next move, I realized he'd become something more, not just my colleague or my friend, but my partner in a fight that would determine whether justice could triumph over greed, whether truth could overcome lies, whether the woman who died on that operating table could truly come back to life. Dr. Sarah Kim's research lab occupied a forgotten corner of the hospital's basement, tucked between storage rooms and mechanical equipment like a secret the administration preferred to ignore. When Marcus led me through the maze of corridors at 4 a.m, I understood why. The space felt like a refuge for ideas too dangerous for mainstream medicine. The lab was cramped, but organized with the precision of someone who'd learned to make the most of limited resources. EEG machines lined one wall, their screens dark but ready. Stacks of research papers covered every available surface, marked with the kind of meticulous annotations that spoke of a mind unwilling to accept easy answers. And in the center of it all sat Dr. Sarah Kim herself, a woman in her early 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "So," she said without preamble as Marcus closed the door behind us, "you're the woman who came back from the dead." I stared at her. "Marcus told you?" "Marcus told me you'd survived something impossible and developed abilities that shouldn't exist. I've been studying consciousness and near-death experiences for 15 years. Trust me, I've heard stranger things." She gestured to a chair wired with electrodes. "The question is whether you're willing to let me study what's happened to you. Will it help me understand it? It might. More importantly, it might help me prove that everything I've been researching isn't just the fantasy of a discredited neurologist." I looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Sarah's work has been dismissed by the medical establishment because it challenges fundamental assumptions about consciousness and death, but her research is solid. "Solid enough to get my funding pulled and my tenure revoked," Sarah added dryly, apparently suggesting that the brain might continue functioning in ways we don't understand after clinical death makes you a liability to the hospital's reputation. I settled into the chair, letting her attach electrodes to my scalp with practiced efficiency. The process was familiar. I'd run similar tests during my neurology rotation, but being the subject instead of the doctor felt strange and vulnerable. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Changes in brain activity patterns. Areas that shouldn't be active but are. Connections between regions that typically don't communicate." Sarah moved to the control panel, her fingers dancing across switches with the confidence of someone who'd run this test hundreds of times. The EEG machine hummed to life, and waves of electrical activity began painting patterns across the screen. Sarah studied them with the intensity of someone reading a foreign language, her expression shifting from curiosity to surprise to something approaching awe. "Marcus, look at this." He moved behind her chair, studying the readouts over her shoulder. "What am I seeing?" "Activity in the posterior parietal cortex and the temporal parietal junction. These regions are associated with out-of-body experiences and psychic phenomena. They're firing at levels I've never seen in a living subject." "What does that mean?" "It means your brain has rewired itself." Sarah turned to me, her scientific excitement tempered with concern.
The trauma you experienced, the period when you were clinically dead, it forced your brain to find new ways to process information. You're accessing regions that most people can't consciously control. Is it permanent? I don't know, but Elena, she paused, choosing her words carefully. What you're experiencing, these visions when you touch objects, they're a form of psychometry, the ability to read the psychic imprints left on physical items. It's been documented throughout history, but never scientifically validated. Because people like you lose their funding when they try to study it. Exactly. Sarah's smile was bitter. But you're living proof that consciousness extends beyond what we understand. With proper documentation, proper study.
She trailed off, her attention caught by something on the EEG readouts. The patterns had shifted, becoming more complex, more intense. What's wrong? Marcus asked. Nothing's wrong, but Elena, I need you to try something. Pick up that research folder on the desk, the one marked Funding Review. I reached for the thick manila folder, my fingers making contact with the worn cover. The vision hit me immediately, stronger than any I'd experienced before. Sarah in a conference room filled with stern-faced administrators, her research spread across the table like evidence in a trial. A man in an expensive suit, the same Vincent Moretti I'd seen with my family, leaning forward with predatory interest. Dr. Kim's research into alleged psychic phenomena is inconsistent with the scientific standards of this institution, Moretti was saying. The board feels that continued funding would be inappropriate. My research is peer-reviewed and methodologically sound. The results? The results are inconclusive at best, fraudulent at worst. I'm sorry, but the decision is final. But there was more. Behind Moretti's polite dismissal, I sensed calculation. He wasn't concerned about scientific standards. He was eliminating a potential threat, someone whose research might validate abilities that could expose his own crimes. I jerked my hand back from the folder, gasping. Moretti, he's the one who had your funding pulled. Sarah's face went pale. How could you possibly know that? The same way I know he's been doing this for years, using his legal connections to silence anyone who might threaten his schemes. I looked between Sarah and Marcus, understanding dawning. He didn't just steal my inheritance, he's been systematically eliminating obstacles, people whose work or knowledge could expose him. That's impossible, Sarah whispered, but her scientific skepticism was warring with the evidence of her own EEG readings, with the impossibility of my knowing details she'd never shared with anyone. Show her the brain scans, Marcus said quietly. Show her what her abilities look like in real time. Sarah turned back to the monitor, and we all watched as my brain activity spiked and shifted, patterns forming that shouldn't exist in normal human consciousness. The temporal parietal junction was lit up like a Christmas tree, while areas associated with memory and emotional processing showed unprecedented connectivity. This is extraordinary, Sarah breathed. Elena, your brain is accessing information through quantum entanglement with objects that have been psychically imprinted by strong emotions. It's theoretical physics meets consciousness research. Can you document it? Prove it scientifically? I can try, but Elena, if what you've told me about your family and this lawyer is true, you're not just dealing with inheritance fraud. You're dealing with someone who has the power to silence research, manipulate medical records, and potentially... She couldn't finish the sentence. Kill people? I completed. Yes, I'm aware. Then we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Documentation is crucial, but so is your safety. Sarah began disconnecting the electrodes with gentle efficiency. I want to run more tests, map your abilities more completely, but first we need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. What do you mean? I mean, Sarah said, her voice grim, that Moretti had my funding pulled because my research threatened him, then there might be other people he's silenced, other families he's manipulated, other inheritances he's stolen. The weight of that possibility settled over me like lead. This wasn't just about my family's betrayal.
It was about a pattern of corruption that extended far beyond my own case. How do we find out? Carefully, and with allies we can trust. I know someone, a detective who's been asking questions about suspicious death certificates, Ray Kowalski. He reached out to me months ago about irregularities in several cases, all involving families represented by the same law firm, Moretti's firm. Yes, but Elena, once we involve law enforcement, there's no going back. You'll be officially alive again with all the complications that brings. I thought about my family, still believing they'd successfully murdered me, about the money they were already spending, the debts they were paying off with my blood, about the other families who might have suffered the same fate. I'm already back, I said finally. The question is what I'm going to do about it. The house I'd bought for my family in Winnetka sat in Winnetka like a monument to my own naivety. 3 stories of red brick and columns, the kind of architectural statement that announced success to the neighborhood. I'd signed the mortgage papers during my first year as an attending physician, proud to give my family the stability they'd never had when I was growing up. Now, standing in the shadows across the street at 2 a.m, it looked like a crime scene. Breaking into my own house should have felt strange. Instead, it felt like justice. The security system I'd installed used my fingerprint for access, and apparently being legally dead didn't change my biometrics. The front door opened silently, revealing the foyer I'd walked through countless times, usually carrying groceries or exhausted from 36-hour shifts.
The familiar smell hit me first. Isabella's expensive perfume mixed with the lingering scent of Bobby's cigarettes and something else I couldn't identify. Fear, maybe. Desperation. The house felt different, charged with emotions that my new abilities picked up like static electricity. I moved through the rooms methodically, touching objects and absorbing the psychic imprints they carried. Each contact brought flashes of recent events, fragments of conversations, and emotions that painted a picture of my family's conspiracy. Isabella's jewelry box on her dresser. The insurance company's asking questions. We need to be more careful about how we spend the money. Bobby's laptop in the den. Gambling websites, debt collection notices, threats that made my blood run cold. Payment due immediately or consequences will be severe. The kitchen table where they'd had breakfast that morning. Sophia's asking too many questions. She needs to understand that keeping quiet protects her children. That last vision stopped me cold. Sophia, my younger sister, the one who'd always tried to mediate family conflicts, who genuinely loved me despite my mother's manipulation. They were threatening her children to keep her silent. I found what I was looking for in Isabella's home office, tucked behind family photos that mocked me with their false warmth. A file folder marked estate planning that contained documents I'd never seen before. Power of attorney papers with my signature, except I'd never signed them. Medical directives I'd never written, and most damning of all, a letter supposedly written by me, giving Isabella full control over my finances and medical decisions in case of emergency. The handwriting was good, close enough to fool a casual observer, but I knew my own hand, knew the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's. These were forgeries, sophisticated ones that had been prepared well before my accident. They'd been planning this for months. I photographed everything with my phone, building a case that no lawyer could dismiss. But as I worked, touching documents and absorbing the emotions embedded in them, I began to understand the full scope of their desperation. Isabella wasn't just in debt, she was drowning. Credit cards maxed out, loans taken against the house, threats from creditors that made Bobby's gambling problems look manageable. She'd been living on borrowed time and borrowed money, all of it predicated on the assumption that I would continue to support her indefinitely. My death hadn't been an opportunity, it had been a necessity. The sound of a car in the driveway sent me scrambling for the back door. Through the kitchen window, I could see headlights sweeping across the garage as someone pulled in. Too early to be a planned visit, too late to be casual. I slipped out through the garden and crouched behind the landscaping I'd paid for, watching as Bobby stumbled out of his BMW. Even from a distance, I could see he was drunk, his movements unsteady as he fumbled with his keys. But he wasn't alone. Two men emerged from a dark sedan that had followed him home. Large men in expensive suits who moved with the predatory grace of people comfortable with violence. Bobby saw them and stopped, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "Mr. Vasquez," one of them said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet neighborhood. "We need to talk. I told you the insurance money's coming through, just another few days. You've been saying that for weeks. Our employer is losing patience. Look, my sister died. The legal process takes time." "Your sister's been dead for almost a week. How much legal process does it take to cash a check?" Bobby's face crumbled, and for a moment I saw the scared little boy he'd been before gambling and entitlement had warped him into something I barely recognized. "There are complications, questions about the death certificate, but my mother's lawyer says—" "Your mother's lawyer says a lot of things. Our employer is concerned that Mr. Moretti's promises might be more optimistic than realistic." The second man moved closer to Bobby, close enough that I could see the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. $800,000, Mr. Vasquez, plus interest, plus the inconvenience fee for making us wait. We'll expect payment within 48 hours, or we'll begin collecting in other ways. "What do you mean?" "Your sister, Sophia, has lovely children. It would be a shame if something happened to them because of their uncle's poor choices." My blood turned to ice. They were threatening Sophia's kids, my nephew and niece, innocent babies who had nothing to do with Bobby's addiction or Isabella's greed. Bobby must have felt the same chill because his voice cracked when he spoke. "No, not the kids. I'll get the money, I swear. Just don't involve them." "Then get it. 48 hours, Mr. Vasquez. Don't make us come looking for you again." The men returned to their car and drove away, leaving Bobby standing there in the driveway like a broken statue. He stood there for almost 10 minutes before finally going inside, and I could hear him calling Isabella from the kitchen. I had to get out of there before they compared notes and realized someone had been in the house. But as I crept through the shadows toward my car, one thought echoed in my mind like a funeral bell. 48 hours. Bobby's creditors would come for Sophia's kids in 48 hours, unless they got their money. And the only way they could get it was by liquidating my estate, which meant keeping me dead by any means necessary. The prophetic dream came at dawn, violent and unavoidable as a seizure.
Sophia's house, quiet in the morning light, her children playing in the backyard while she watched from the kitchen window, coffee mug in her hands. The same scene I'd witnessed 100 times during family visits, domestic and peaceful and safe. Then, the black sedan pulling into the driveway. The same men who'd threatened Bobby, but now their attention was focused on a different target. Sophia, opening the door, confusion shifting to terror as they pushed their way inside. "Where are the children, Mrs. Martinez? What do you want? Why are you here?" "Your brother owes our employer a significant amount of money. Since he seems unable to pay, we're exploring alternative arrangements. 8-year-old Miguel and 6-year-old Carmen screaming as strangers carried them away. Sophia's desperate pleas echoing through the house like a prayer no one would answer. I woke up in Marcus's guest bedroom with tears on my face and certainty in my heart. The visions weren't just showing me the past anymore. They were showing me what was coming. Sophia's children would be taken today unless I stopped it. "Elena?" Marcus knocked on the door, his voice heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from sleepless nights spent grappling with impossible situations. "You were screaming." "Prophetic dream," I said, pulling on the clothes Sarah had brought me the night before. "Sophia's in danger, her kids." I told him about the vision while we drove through Chicago's morning traffic, my hands clenched in my lap as I fought the urge to tell him to drive faster. The prophetic dreams were new, stronger than the psychometric visions, and they carried a weight of inevitability that made my chest tight with panic. "How do you know it's prophetic and not just anxiety?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already believed me. "Because I can feel it happening, like watching a movie where you know the ending, except the ending hasn't been written yet." I tried calling Sophia, but it went straight to voicemail. Sophia lived in Lincoln Park, in a modest 2-story house that she and her husband had bought back when teachers could still afford Chicago real estate. I had helped with the down payment, of course, just like I'd helped with everything else in my family's lives. The black sedan was already parked across the street when we arrived. "There," I pointed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Those are the men from my vision." Marcus pulled over 2 blocks away, and we approached on foot, using parked cars and morning shadows for cover. Through Sophia's kitchen window, I could see her making breakfast, her movements normal and unhurried. She had no idea what was coming. Miguel and Carmen were in the backyard exactly as I'd seen in the dream. Miguel was pushing Carmen on the swing set I'd bought them last Christmas, both of them laughing with the unconscious joy of children who still believed the world was safe. "We need to call the police," Marcus said. "And tell them what? That I had a psychic vision about a crime that hasn't happened yet?" I shook my head. "They'll think we're crazy, and by the time they figure out we're not, Sophia's kids will be gone." "Then what do you suggest?" I was already moving, crossing the street with the purposeful stride of someone who'd made a decision. My supernatural abilities were untested in combat, but I had other advantages. I knew this neighborhood, knew Sophia's house, knew exactly how those men planned to approach. And unlike them, I was already supposed to be dead. The front doorbell rang just as I reached the backyard gate. Through the kitchen window, I watched Sophia dry her hands and move toward the front of the house, completely unaware that opening that door would destroy her world. "Kids," I called softly to Miguel and Carmen, "come here, quickly." They recognized my voice, even though I was supposed to be dead. Children adapted to impossible things more easily than adults. "Aunt Elena?" Miguel said. His eyes went wide. "But Mom said you were—" "I know what Mom said. Right now, I need you both to be very quiet and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" They nodded, sensing the urgency in my voice. I led them to the garage where Sophia's minivan provided cover from the house. "I want you to hide in the car and don't come out until either me, your mom, or the police come to get you. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay hidden. Understand?" "Are we in trouble?" Carmen whispered, her 6-year-old voice trembling. "No, sweetheart, but some bad men are trying to hurt your family, and I'm going to stop them." I settled them in the back seat of the van and locked the doors from the inside, then crept back toward the house. Through the windows, I could see Sophia making breakfast, her movements normal and unhurried. She had no idea what was coming. "Mrs. Martinez, we need to discuss your brother's debts."
I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave. I'm afraid we can't do that. You see, when people don't pay what they owe, we have to explore creative collection methods.
Sophia was backing away from them, her face pale with growing terror. One of the men was already moving toward the back door, positioning himself to cut off escape routes. That's when I made my choice. I walked through the front door like I owned the place, which technically I did since I'd been helping with the mortgage payments for years. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The three people in Sophia's living room turned to stare at me. Sophia's face went white, then red, then white again as she processed the impossibility of my presence. The two men looked confused, checking their phones like they expected to find an explanation in their messages. "Elena?" Sophia's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, sister." I moved into the room with calm deliberation, positioning myself between the men and Sophia. "I understand there's some confusion about Bobby's debts. Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this is family business. Actually, it's my business. You see, Bobby owes you money that he expected to inherit from me. Problem is, I'm not as dead as everyone thought." I reached out and touched the man's hand before he could draw his weapon. The psychometric vision hit me like a sledgehammer. A warehouse on the south side, dozens of people who'd borrowed money and couldn't pay it back, the screams that echoed through the night when lessons needed to be taught, the children who'd been taken as collateral, the families destroyed for the sake of compound interest. And behind it all, a connection to Vincent Moretti. Legal services provided in exchange for a percentage of collections. A symbiotic relationship between white-collar crime and street-level violence. I jerked my hand back, gasping. But now I knew exactly who these men worked for, and more importantly, I knew their weaknesses. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady despite the horror I'd just witnessed. "You're going to leave my sister's house. You're going to tell your employer that Elena Vasquez is very much alive and will be reclaiming her assets. And you're going to understand that threatening children is a line that once crossed has permanent consequences." Here bluffing. Am I? I smiled, and something in my expression made both men take a step backward. "Your boss is Victor Kozlov. He operates out of a warehouse at 2847 South Ashland. He's been laundering money through Vincent Moretti's law firm for 3 years, using inheritance fraud to clean the profits from his loan sharking operation." The silence that followed was deafening. Neither man had mentioned their employer's name or location. There was no way I could know those details unless... How the fuck did you know that? The same way I know that if anything happens to my sister or her children, I'll make sure Detective Ray Kowalski gets a very detailed report about your operation, complete with addresses, names, and financial records. It was a bluff, but a convincing one. The men exchanged glances, calculating odds and consequences. Finally, the first one nodded. "This isn't over." "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." They left without another word, and Sophia collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. "Elena, they said you were dead. The funeral, the will reading? I was supposed to be dead. Isabella and Bobby made sure of that." I knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in mine. "Sophia, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know what they were planning?" Her face crumpled, and the guilt that poured out of her was answer enough. "They said if I told anyone, they'd take the kids away. Said I was an unfit mother, that they had lawyers who could prove it in court." Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't want you to die, Elena. I swear I didn't want that. But they said you were already brain dead, that it was just a matter of time." "They lied. I know that now. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. I should have fought for you, should have questioned everything. But they were scared, and they made it sound like it was already decided." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her sob against my shoulder. Sophia had always been the middle child, the peacemaker.
the one who tried to hold our fractured family together. Isabella and Bobby had weaponized that instinct, used her love for her children as leverage to ensure her silence. "It's not your fault," I whispered. "But Sophia, I need your help now. I need you to help me gather evidence against them, against all of them." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be brave. One more time." Outside, I could hear Marcus calling my name. The children were safe, Sophia was on my side, and Bobby's creditors were neutralized. But this was just the beginning. Now came the hard part. Now came justice. Detective Ray Kowalski had the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much, and the sharp eyes of someone who still cared enough to do something about it. When I walked into his office with Marcus and Sophia, he studied me with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together.
"So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you're the dead woman who's been causing problems for Vincent Moretti." "I'm the woman he tried to kill," I corrected. "There's a difference." "Yeah, there is." He opened a thick file on his desk. "I've been investigating irregularities in death certificates for 6 months, 5 cases, all involving families represented by Moretti's firm, all with suspicious circumstances around the decision to withdraw life support." My blood ran cold. 5 other families? 5 other inheritances, totaling just over $12 million. His voice was grim. "You're not Moretti's first victim, Dr. Vasquez. You're just the first one to survive." He spread photographs across his desk, faces of people I'd never met, but whose stories I recognized in my bones. A wealthy businessman whose children had him declared brain dead after a minor stroke. An elderly woman whose nephew convinced doctors she was terminal when her cancer was actually in remission. A young tech entrepreneur whose siblings pulled the plug after a motorcycle accident that should have been survivable. "They're all dead now," Kowalski continued. "Really dead. But the pattern is always the same. Families in financial crisis, medical decisions made with unusual haste, and Vincent Moretti handling the legal paperwork." "Can you prove it?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm working on it, but Elena's case gives us something I didn't have before. A living witness who can testify to the conspiracy." He looked at me directly. "The question is whether you're willing to take that risk." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know you're alive. Meet us at the warehouse, or your sister's children disappear forever." "They know," I said, showing Kowalski the message. "Somehow they figured out I survived." "Which means they're desperate." He was already reaching for his radio. "Desperate people make mistakes, but they also do dangerous things." The warehouse sat like a concrete monument to despair on Chicago's South Side, its windows dark and its loading docks empty in the afternoon light. But I could feel the presence of people inside, their emotions radiating through the walls like heat from a fire. Kowalski's surveillance team was positioned around the building, invisible but ready. Marcus waited in an unmarked car 2 blocks away, monitoring my vitals through a device Sarah had rigged to track the unusual patterns in my brain activity. Sarah was safe in protective custody with her children, finally free from the threats that had silenced her for so long. I walked through the front entrance alone, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Dr. Elena Vasquez, back from the dead, as it were. He stood in the center of the warehouse, flanked by Bobby and Isabella. Behind them, Victor Kozlov's men formed a semicircle of implied violence. The scene looked like a tribunal, with me as the defendant in a trial I'd never agreed to attend. "Vincent," I said calmly, "I have to say, your record-keeping is impressive. 5 families murdered for their inheritances. That takes planning." "No one was murdered," Isabella snapped. "These were mercy decisions, families choosing to end suffering." "Whose suffering, Mother? Theirs or yours?" I touched the metal railing beside me and let the psychometric visions flow. The warehouse exploded with images of terror and greed. Families threatened into compliance, medical records falsified, death certificates signed by doctors who'd been paid to look the other way. "You're all connected," I said, the certainty of it settling over me like armor.
Moretti provides the legal framework, Kozlov provides the muscle, and families like mine provide the cover story. A perfect system for stealing millions from people who trusted you. Enough, Kozlov stepped forward, his hand moving toward his weapon. You're supposed to be dead. We can arrange for that to become permanent. Can you? I smiled, feeling the power of my abilities surge through me like electricity. That's when Bobby broke. I can't do this anymore. He collapsed to his knees, his voice cracking with emotion. She's my sister. I never wanted her to die. I just wanted the gambling debts to go away. Shut up, Bobby, Isabella hissed. No! He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. Elena, I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. They said you were already gone, that we were just making it official. But I knew, deep down, I knew it was wrong. Bobby, Moretti started. I'll testify. Bobby's voice rose to a shout. I'll tell them everything. How you forged Elena's signature, how you bribed Dr. Matthews to falsify the death certificate, how you threatened Sophia's kids to keep her quiet. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of Bobby's sobs. Then Kozlov drew his gun. This ends now. But before he could fire, the warehouse doors exploded inward as Kowalski's team moved in. Shouts of "Police!" echoed through the space as tactical officers swarmed the building. In the chaos that followed, Isabella made one last desperate play. She grabbed a gun from one of Kozlov's men and pointed it at my chest. You ungrateful bitch! I gave you life and this is how you repay me? You gave me life, I agreed, stepping closer instead of backing away. But then you tried to take it back. That's where you made your mistake.
I reached out and touched her hand, the one holding the gun. The psychometric vision that followed was so intense it dropped me to my knees. Isabella as a young woman, beautiful and ambitious, marrying my father for his money only to discover he had less than she'd been led to believe. Years of resentment building as she watched other families live the life she felt entitled to. The slow realization that her daughter's success could be her salvation. And underneath it all, something I'd never seen before. Genuine love, twisted and poisoned by greed until it became something unrecognizable. You did love me once, I whispered, looking up at her from the warehouse floor. I can see it. Before the money became more important than everything else. Isabella's hand shook, the gun wavering between my face and the floor. For a moment, I saw the woman she might have been if desperation hadn't consumed her. Then Kowalski's voice cut through the moment. Drop the weapon, Mrs. Vasquez. It's over. She looked around the warehouse, seeing Moretti in handcuffs, Kozlov surrounded by tactical officers, Bobby still on his knees confessing to anyone who would listen. The empire of greed and manipulation they'd built was crumbling around her. The gun clattered to the concrete floor. It's over, I agreed, getting to my feet. Finally. 6 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom listening to Bobby testify against the people who'd manipulated his weakness into a weapon against his own family. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, but cleaner somehow, like confession had washed away years of accumulated guilt. I signed the papers because they told me Elena was already dead, he said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. I told myself we were just making it official, but I knew it was wrong. I knew, and I did it anyway because I was scared of what would happen if I didn't pay my debts. Isabella sat at the defendant's table like a queen in exile, her perfect composure cracked but not broken. She'd pled not guilty to all charges, maintaining that everything they'd done had been motivated by love and mercy. Even now, she refused to admit that greed had poisoned whatever love she'd once felt for me. Vincent Moretti showed no such delusions. Faced with evidence of 5 separate murder conspiracies, he'd negotiated a plea deal that would put him away for life in exchange for his testimony against the larger network of corruption he'd helped create. The media attention had been intense, but brief. Surgeon rises from the dead to expose family conspiracy had been headline news for exactly 1 news cycle before being replaced by the next impossible story. Chicago was a city that had seen everything. Even resurrection couldn't hold its attention for long. But the medical community's reaction had been different. Dr. Sarah Kim's research had suddenly found new funding as the scientific establishment grappled with the implications of my case. My brain scans were being studied at universities around the world, contributing to a new understanding of consciousness and the possibilities that lay beyond clinical death. And as for my abilities, they'd evolved since that first terrifying awakening in the morgue. The psychometric visions were stronger now, more controllable. I could read the emotional history of objects and places with increasing precision. And the prophetic dreams had become a regular occurrence, showing me glimpses of future events that I could sometimes influence and sometimes only witness. Dr. Vasquez, the prosecutor said, bringing my attention back to the courtroom, "Would you please tell the court about the moment you realized your family intended to kill you?" I looked across the courtroom at Isabella, at Bobby, at the ruins of the family I'd sacrificed so much to support. Then I looked at Marcus in the gallery, at Sophia holding her children, at the new family I'd chosen and who had chosen me in return. "I realized it when I woke up in a morgue," I said simply. "Everything after that was just understanding the details." The testimony took 3 days. When it was over, Isabella was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Bobby got 15 years but would be eligible for parole in 7 with good behavior and continued cooperation. Moretti would die behind bars. Justice, it turned out, was possible after all. But as I walked out of the courthouse with Marcus behind me and Sophia's children holding my hands, I understood that justice was just the beginning. I'd been given a second life and abilities that most people couldn't imagine. Now I had to decide what to do with both. 6 months later, I opened my medical advocacy center, using my supernatural abilities to help families facing impossible decisions. Marcus worked beside me as my partner in every sense. Sophia's children called me Aunt Elena, accepting miracles easier than adults accepted impossibilities. I died and returned with gifts beyond explanation, but more importantly, with wisdom to serve others facing betrayal like mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.